Hi everyone and welcome back to the Crafty Yellow Camper, and today we are going to be using one of the new sets from the seasonal catalogue. This is called Dragonfly Garden. You've got this really nice pretty floral element, a couple of dragonflies, some nice greetings, and that coordinates with this punch. Hopefully you can see that properly there. So we've got a large dragonfly which coordinates with these two in the set, and then there's a little dinky one there. So the card we're going to make today, I'm just going to put these to one side, just quite a simple, quick to put together card, using the floral image and some of the dragonflies, and then just on the inside here the stamp of sort of, I guess they're butterflies really, more than dragonflies, but they might be stylized dragonflies. But anyway, okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I've done is I have got a card base which is cut from an A4 sheet, so that is half of an A4 sheet if you're in the UK, whatever the size sheet is if you're elsewhere. And I have gone ahead and I have embossed the front, so it's half a sheet folded in half to make a standard C6, and I've gone ahead and I've embossed the front of the card. Sorry, I just realised that wasn't level. Okay, and I have used the greenery embossing folders, and I've used this floral one here. I don't know if you can see that. It's got a floral element at the top and a floral element at the bottom, and these are specifically sized to fit our new mini cutting machine. Obviously they fit perfectly well through a full-size one as well. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and embossed that, and then the next thing I've done is I've got a panel of the papers that coordinate with this set and with the dandelion set, which I'll be showing you some cards in later videos. And this piece is cut at 14 centimeters long, so this paper is in 6x6 sheets. Oh, sorry, 6x6 sheets, and it's 14 centimeters long, and it is just over 5. It's 5.123 centimeters wide. Now the reason that that isn't an exact width is because this is what's left over from one of the 6x6 sheets after you have cut a standard C6 card sized mat, which I cut at 10 centimeters by 14.3. So that's what's left over. Really pretty cardstock. Okay, and we're going to adhere this to the left hand side of our card. So I'm just going to go ahead and use some wet glue. Now I find tape runner works fine, but if you're trying to stick onto something that's been embossed, obviously it isn't a flat surface, so using wet glue will give you a better result. And we're just going to stick this with a small gap to the left. The embossing folder isn't as wide as the card base because they are sized to fit into the mini die cutting machine, but by adding that strip you don't really notice that there's a line down there from the embossing folder. Okay, so now we're going to move on to this, and this is one of the stitched rectangles that I've used for that, and we're going to use this lovely big sentiment here. Now you might notice that this doesn't fit onto my block because it's a square block. You will need to use the biggest rectangle block that we sell to fit that on, but for our purposes today we only need the top of it, so that's going to work fine. And I'm going to stamp in basic grey. My other card that I showed you, this one here, is actually stamped in black, but I didn't like it as much, so I'm just going to ink up. We only need to ink up the top of the stamp because our rectangle is smaller. And I'm just going to line that up so it's near the top, but onto the rectangle. Give that a good press down. Try really hard not to wobble your blocks, otherwise you will get lines. And there we go. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. If you wiggle your blocks like that, what will happen is where the smaller parts of the stamp, and this happens a lot. I have a lot of people ask me how to avoid this on small stamps. You will catch the edge of the stamp and then you'll end up with that sort of halo effect around on your stamp, which is not what we want. So we're just going to set that to one side for the minute, and then we're going to work on our dragonflies. Okay, now as I said before, there is a punch. So what we need to do is stamp our dragonfly towards the bottom of the image. And there are two dragonflies. This one, I'm just trying to get it so hopefully you can see it. This one has got sort of more of a wavy line, and this one's got more of a angled line. So the one we're going to use is the wavy line, and again I'm going to ink that up in basic grey. And with our stamps we need to get to the bottom of the punch, sorry, with the punch, because the little one is up the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp that at the bottom of my cardstock, so that when we feed it in to the punch we'll be able to line it up. Okay, now you can punch it out at this stage. I'm not going to, and you'll see why in a minute. And I'm just going to stamp another dragonfly up above this one. Okay, so that's our stamping done for that card for the minute. I'm just going to pop that basic grey out of the way and move my cardstock out of the way. Now, what I wanted to do for these is I wanted to colour them in. On this one, I've actually used ink, and I've used this little stamp here, which comes in the stamp set, and you look at it and think, well, actually that's only one side of the dragonfly, but it does work. So I'm going to show you what I did to stamp that, and I'm going to use some Calypso Coral and some Bumblebee and possibly a little bit of cinnamon cider. Okay, and I'm going to use some blending brushes. And these aren't my Stampin' Up blending brushes, they're on their way to me, but as some of you might know, we've had some delays in shipping at the minute. So the general rule of thumb with this is to start with the lightest colour first and then add your darker colours over the top. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in my Bumblebee pad and I'm just going to ink up the whole stamp with my Bumblebee pad. There we go, that's that one. And then next I'm going to bring in my Calypso Coral and one of my blending brushes. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of ink from my ink pad. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go round the ends of my stamp because I want to get a sort of an ombre effect. Okay, so that's the Calypso Coral one. And then I just want to add in a little tiny bit of this cinnamon cider just on the edges on there. Obviously try not to get your brushes in a muddle. Okay, and I'm going to huff on that. I'm going to do this side first, and this is one of those sort of like arty splodgy stamp sets. Can you see there? You've got the Bumblebee and the Calypso Coral and a little bit of the cinnamon cider. So the only problem with this technique is that you do need to clean off your stamp in between, because I don't want to get cinnamon cider and Calypso Coral on my Bumblebee stamp. So I'm just ink pad, sorry. So I'm just going to give that a quick clean. I'm going to ink that up again, and then I'm going to go back in. Okay, so let's go back in with the Calypso Coral. Okay. Don't press too hardly on your ink pads with the blending brushes, because otherwise you'll be spreading the ink out from the other colours. Okay, I'm just going to go in on the tips of that one. Give it a bit of a huff to make sure the ink is moistened, and then you won't get an exact line up, but you can use it to do the other side. And if what's happened as happened with mine here, you can see I was a little bit high up. If I go back in, I'm just on that edge, and then I should be able to cover that, because obviously we're going to punch that out anyway. Okay, so we can bring our punch in. Make sure we've got our dragonfly lined up. And this does punch a reasonable amount of white round it. Okay, so make sure you've got your top wings down low enough. Give that a little punch. And you can see here it's punched out the small dragonfly, which is at the top. So we just discard that one. And that's our actual dragonfly that we've just done. Now I wanted to show you a tip which I picked up from an American demonstrator watching online. So we're going to repeat this process with our stamp again. So bumblebee first, and then a little bit of calypso coral on the ends of the wing, followed by a touch of cinnamon cider just on those ends. And don't worry about the fact that we've punched through the tail of that one, it isn't going to matter. So just give it a little huff. It's really hard lining things up actually when I'm not directly over the top. Oh, that wasn't too bad. So that's one side. So we'll just give that a little clean off on our chamois. Obviously, ideally, you'd have some scrap paper to one side and stamp off a little bit. I run out of desk space when I'm filming, so that's our little bit of calypso coral on there again. And obviously you can use whatever colours that you've got at home. These are just the ones that I thought would go nicely with the patterned papers that we're using. Okay, get those in a muddle. I'm going to try and line this one up. A little bit off, but we can go back in and get the rest of the ink off there. Okay, so you can see here that we've stamped our other dragonfly. Yes, we've got that little one coming through there, and you're probably wondering why I've coloured it in when we stamped a chunk out of it, but hopefully you will see why now. So I'm just cutting off the excess cardstock we've got there, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing and come in across that tail. We don't need this piece, that's the piece that we cut the first dragonfly out of. Now what we're going to do is come back in with our punch. Ordinarily I wouldn't trim that much cardstock away because I wouldn't be able to hold this in the punch to get it in the right place, but we're just going to do this little dragonfly here. So what we need to do is just hang on to it and put it in so that we've got a little bit of the head. What I'm actually doing is getting most of the thorax of the dragonfly in view so that the little tiny head bit up there is filled with the black. Okay, and then line it up, and then there we have a little tiny dragonfly. He's got his little bit of tail, he's got a little bit for his head, and by lining that up to the bottom of the head, it makes it fill in. Okay, so there we go. There you can see the bit that I've cut out. So we were a little bit further down on the head with the head of the punch, and then it's taken out the wings and a little bit of the tail as well, and then this piece is obviously just scrap. Okay, so that's a little tip for you for how to get a small dragonfly, because there isn't one in the set. So let's continue putting this card together. I'm just going to close up my ink pads. Ouch, because that's what I do. Some of mine are really stiff. I always stamp in an old top. So I now have a line of cinnamon cider down my front. These are actually washable ink pads, so it will wash out eventually. Okay, so don't stamp in your best frock, otherwise you might be disappointed if you do what I've just done and end up with ink down the front of it. Right, I'm just going to wipe the excess ink off my fingers so I don't get them all over that white panel. Okay, right, so back to our card. So we've got our base, which we've embossed with one of those greenery embossing folders. We've got our really lovely DSP there, which has got the bumblebee on the dandelions and mossy meadow for a background. Okay, and we've got our panel here that we have stamped. Now you could colour this in if you wanted to. For the purposes of this card, I want to get that sort of monochrome effect, so I'm going to leave that blank, and I'm just going to layer that up onto some dimensionals. So I'm just going to pop 4 dimensionals on the back, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, and then I'm going to pop a dimensional into the middle of my dragonfly, and then on our little dinky dragonfly that we've got, I'm just going to pop a mini dimensional, and they are just about the right size to fit in the middle of the dragonfly. Okay, so let's get this card layered up. That's our little dragonfly there. So I'm just taking the backs off the dimensionals. Make sure you get it the right way up. Okay, and I'm just going to sort of line this up in the middle of our DSP. Just make sure your edges are straight, because it will notice if they're not. And then for our dragonfly, we've got 1 big dimensional back on there, and we're going to pop him there. And then our little dinky one that we've got, we're just going to put on the corner of our stitched panel there. And then the final thing that I did was just go in with a little bit of Wink of Stella, and I'm just going to brush some of that over the wings, because dragonflies have shimmery wings, so we need a shimmery dragonfly. Okay, just put a little bit over that one. And then I'm just going to go down the body as well. I find that if you use a Wink of Stella over something like a dark grey, it just darkens it down a little bit. Okay, and then what we can do is just bend the wings up a little bit on our card by putting a thumbnail sort of where you want the bend to be. Okay, just to raise it up a little bit. There we go. And there's that first card finished. Quite simple, quite quick to make, and hopefully you'll enjoy the ink technique on the wings. So that's all for me for today. I'll be back soon with another card using this same set. Happy stamping. Bye for now.